Oh boy, what have I done? Yes, this is now actually a thing. I made a fully functional walking house in Minecraft only using commands in the resource pack. If this seems like something you'd want to have in your own world, I have good news for you, because this creation is available for download on my website linked below. But let's rewind a little to see how this monstrosity even came into existence. About a week ago, MumboJumbo uploaded a video which in my opinion was absolutely fantastic. In it, he created a walking house using redstone and slime blocks. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you give it a watch. I'll leave a link to it in the description. After watching his video, I was like, hey, I can do that as well. But since I'm a redstone noob and this is a command block channel, I of course went for a different approach and decided to make a really polished and user-friendly walking house. Toward the end of the video, I'll give you an explanation of how to use the datapack in your own world, so stay tuned if that's what you're here for. When I started working on this creation, I had to figure out how to smoothly move blocks around. It was clear to me that using actual blocks would not be a viable option, so instead I needed to use some sort of entity that I could smoothly teleport around. When it comes to moving blocks, falling sand is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But that is not really an ideal option either, because the teleportation is really jittery and simply doesn't look good. And it's also not possible to rotate falling sand, so the house would have been stuck in the same rotation. It was really important to me that the house could move into any direction though, so I had to come up with an alternative. The solution to every single problem in Minecraft is armor stands, of course, and this beautiful entity came in once again to save the day. If I could somehow link the house to the armor stand, I had all the freedom in the world and could easily control it to do whatever I wish. Putting a custom block model on the head of an armor stand is exactly the functionality I needed. The only problem was that block models are generally pretty small, and well, I wanted to go big. So I went into Cubic Studio and created a random cube with the absolute biggest size possible. In addition to tripling the side length, I also changed the display scale of the head slot to the maximum of 4. When I tested the model in game, I was left with an about 7.5 block tall cube. That meant my house could not be taller than 7 blocks, or my custom model would be unable to display it in a realistic scale. I took a look at Mumbo's design again and came up with a quite similar and slightly bigger one. Since it was supposed to be a walking house, I gave him some arms and legs too. Now came quite a tricky part, and that was making an exact replica of the house I just made in the form of a block model. I was quite happy when I tested my model in game, and the next step was making the block version of the house transition to the model. To test how smooth it would look, I set up a little clock and repeatedly switched back and forth between the two. To my shock, it did not look good whatsoever because the UV mapping was completely messed up. Since I'm a perfectionist, I spent another couple hours manually adjusting the UVs for every single block so that it would perfectly match the original house. That transition was still not perfect, but I already had an idea how to work around the slight blinking, which I will get to later. Now that I had the house in block model form on an armor stand, it was time to make it transform into the walking version I had built. I recreated the arms and legs in the exact process as before and teleported them relative to the center armor stand until I had a result I was happy with. I'm not gonna bore you with the command specific details, but I basically used a bunch of scoreboard timers to transition from the normal to the standing house. I was thinking a lot about how to actually control the house. One of my ideas would have been to put custom items in the place inventory, which you could have right clicked to control it, but in the end I decided to make some sort of control panel using tailrock commands. Controlling the house while standing next to it felt kinda weird though, and I really wanted to convey the feeling that the player actually was the house instead of making it feel like a pet or something. My first approach was putting the player inside of the house and making him look out of the windows, for example. But you would not have seen anything through the tiny opening, and the big problem was that block models don't actually render unless they're on your screen. So I couldn't even have put the player next to the window. So to make the model render at all times, I knew I had to put the player far away from the house, and so I decided to create some sort of third-person controller. The basic idea behind it is to have an armor stand in the center of the house, to give it the same rotation as the player, and then teleport the player relative to it with local coordinates. That way he would always look at the armor stand while being a certain number of blocks away from it. Of course, that didn't really work out too well because directly teleporting the player is extremely jittery, which was an absolute no-go for me. Luckily, there is a way to prevent this by making the player write another entity and then teleporting that instead of the player directly. It looked really smooth. I hooked the system up to my house mechanics and made the pig and the saddle invisible and had the exact third-person controller I was trying to create. And next was the walking animation. I used a bunch of scoreboard timers to make the arms and legs swing back and forth, and also set up a system to smoothly transition between the two animation states. To make the whole thing move forward, I just gave it motion into the direction the house was looking in, which on a flat surface would have been easy, but I also wanted the house to be able to move up one block. So I played around a bit and came up with a system which would check the block in front of the house, and if possible would give the armor stand motion upwards. A really annoying problem with my mechanic was that I basically checked for air in front of the armor stand, which would prevent it from walking through grass, rails or flowers, for example. So I had to add a bunch of other commands that would also test for tons of other pass-through blocks. I hooked the system up to a toggle switch in the control panel, and you could now control the movement of the house. Whenever the house was moving, I also just enabled the walking animation and had my first moment of victory. Next off, I implemented the rotation commands and also connected them to the tellraw commands. That worked surprisingly well, and even the walking mechanic still worked for all the other directions. Since only being able to walk up one block would make climbing mountains quite a pain, I also made a jump mechanic. If you press the jump text, it basically gives the armor stand motion upwards, and if you activated the walk button, it would launch you forwards as well. To make the jump more appealing, I also added a little animation to the arms. And because a walking house without any attacks is just straight up boring, I also implemented a Tnt Cannon, which you can fire about once a second. The house obviously needed to transition back as well. When initiated, I first of all disabled all the user inputs, then rotated the house into the original orientation, teleported it directly into the center of the block it was standing on, and played the same animation as from the start, but in reverse. Then I replaced the custom model with actual blocks again, and finally I simply teleported the player back into the house where he started his journey. If you remember the blinking problem from the start of the video, as an easy workaround for that, I simply teleported the player to the third-person controller and back in the exact tick that the transition took place. That way the user of the walking house wouldn't notice anything. In the end, I added some small things like the spawning mechanism or an automatic chat clearing system, but with that, my dream of having a walking house was finally a reality. In the description, you will find a download link to all the files you need. Just drop the datapack file into the datapacks folder of your world, and then paste the resource pack into the resourcepacks folder of your .minecraft directory. Once you get the welcome message, you should be ready to go. Spawning a walking house is really easy. Put a diamond block into the middle of a chest, 10 oak planks next to it, 3 cobblestone stairs in the top row, and 15 stone bricks in the bottom one. If you now drop another star onto the chest, it will transform into a magical house. Keep in mind that spawning in one of them deletes all the other walking houses from your world, so there can only be one at a time. If you now walk inside and right click the particles, the intro animation will start and you will get access to the control panel. Just open the chat and press the different buttons, should be pretty self-explanatory. Pressing the exit button will initiate the exit animation and put you back into the house. You can also press shift to exit and the house will transform back without teleporting you. To remove the house, get yourself a stack of TNT and drop it into the house, which will give you back the house in form of a spawn egg. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to try it out for yourself, feel free to do so. The download link is in the description. All in all, I'm really happy how this turned out. It was an absolute nightmare to debug this and it took me a really long time to get it working how I wanted it. But it was definitely worth it because, well, now we have walking houses in Minecraft. I was trying to keep the explanation somewhat understandable For everyone interested in the specific commands, feel free to look at the data pack. I labeled all the different sections, so if you have some command knowledge, you can find out all the magic behind it. A massive thank you to MumboJumbo for inspiring this video. Without him, I wouldn't have come up with this creation. And that concludes today's video. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, a like and comment would absolutely make my day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.